Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. For quite some time now, we've been led to believe that science is king, that the experts that do science are to be completely trusted to know what they're doing and why they're doing it, what they're expecting to find doing this science, and don't question the process or the science, or else you're a science denier and a flat earther, and even worse, you probably believe in some sort of magical sky daddy. I have a slightly different take on this theory. My humble opinion, I'd argue that both science and the experts should be immediately disbelieved, regardless of what they say, and then let the burden fall on them to prove that they have any ground to stand on. Personally, I don't trust any of them until they can prove it, and most of them have no proof except for, well, because I said so, or, well, our model says so, and we all know how I feel about models. Well, scientific models, let me be specific. On today's episode, first you'll want to take care of your brain, as it's the only one you have, and you barely have that. Then we'll see the true power of dark science, and finally we'll look at some real data you can trust, because it's my data. So place your head gently on your pillow, preferably a My Pillow. You don't want the lefties to win, do you? Then fire up that shower. No need to take your clothes off. Just listen to this episode, then jump right in. And finally, you can breathe a sigh of relief as you hear real, legitimate, scientific data. I could even make you some graphs. I won't, but I could. And after all the analyses, despite your skepticism, here we go. Have you been keeping up with the news? I mean, nothing specifically necessarily, just the news in general. I mean, what's up with fill in the blank topic? Am I right? Or have you ever spoken with a toddler or a teenager, tried to do calculus? What's with all the seemingly random questions you may ask? Well, go ahead. You can ask. Simple. Those are all scenarios where you feel like your brain is melting, right? Yeah, I'm right. The brain is an amazing thing. We don't really know how it works. Not really. I mean, we know how it sort of works, but for the most part, it's still kind of a mystery. It's unlike every other organ we have. It's absolutely vital to our survival, but it can be damaged, in some cases badly, and it'll kind of reroute and relearn in a lot of cases and just keep functioning. We use our entire brain, but we can't use more than like 20% at one time or we'll seize up, unless, I don't know, maybe that's been debunked at this point as well. And the most amazing thing about it is that it evolved. Over millions of years, it evolved from a single cell to what we have today, and nobody knows how. Now, sure, scientists line up the brains of various animals in an order of smaller to larger, in the assumed path that evolution took to get from slime to human. And yeah, I mean, it looks correct, all in order, but nobody really knows how the brain really started or how it evolved. We refer to the brain as gray matter because it's just kind of a grayish, meaty, wrinkly blob, and we're supposed to believe that this wrinkled lump started from nothing and eventually through random chance mutations got to where we are today. Now, for the Christian, we do, or we should, poo-poo the evolution idea, as that's completely counter to the Bible. It's illogical and unprovable, and except in the world of some really weird quasi-fantasy-based religion, which is what evolutionism is, it's quite clearly an impossible theory. In fact, it's statistically impossible as well. But as evolutionism is a religion or a cult unto itself, the adherents will defend the most insane, illogical talking points that have been handed down from their humanist masters in order for there to be no set rules of morals and ethics, which when you come right down to it, that's really what's important. But over and over, those who claim the Bible is nothing but fiction, including the young earth, God spoke everything into existence, and 6 24-hour days creation narrative people are rebuffed when the latest archaeological discovery is found. Those sacrificing their dignity to Darwin can be easily debated using biblical knowledge and real, repeatable, testable science. Most evolutionists only discuss their specialty, typically a very small slice of the total evolutionary pie, and then pass the buck to the next guy when they've reached the boundaries of their so-called expertise. And that's fine. But although the boundaries of those areas of expertise generally roughly align from scientist to scientist, the meat of each evolutionary discipline refutes or contradicts the meat of the other evolutionary disciplines. So the entire theory kind of falls apart if you do anything more than just blindly accept a very shallow explanation of evolution as a whole as being true. Then there are some things that I think God definitely did, things he created or created in a certain way to make the evolutionists, look silly. Planets spinning or rotating in opposite directions, which, per the theory of the Big Bang and the theory of the conservation of angular momentum, is impossible, or creatures like the bombardier beetle, which had to have evolved all at the same time, or it wouldn't exist, or the giraffe, which had to have evolved a large number of very unique anatomical parts and systems in a very certain way all at the same time, or all giraffes would have died. But this latest one, this is really interesting, I think. Found on newatlas.com, headline, "Our brain matter is stuck at a phase transition," says new study. So most matter has a point where it goes through a phase transition. Think of ice. There's a point of slush, right, where either the ice is going from liquid to solid or solid to liquid. There's also a point, if you heat the water up hot enough, where the water transitions from liquid to gas. The transition phase usually passes quickly as the molecules slow down or speed up, expand or contract, and they change state. Now, theoretically, if you're moving between phases, you could potentially hold that phase transition point, but that takes some very carefully controlled environments, and it must be controlled by very precise pieces of equipment. Back to the brain. Quote, "Based on fractal patterns in neurons, researchers believe our brains exist at or near a state called criticality, where they're extremely close to shifting from one state of matter to another. They also admit they don't know what either state is." So we know that matter exists as solid, liquid, or gas, or as a plasma, which is essentially an electrically charged form of gas. But they're saying that research, actual observational science, is telling them that the brain is basically on a knife's edge between two states of matter. And if that's not wild enough, they can't identify what either of those states of matter really are. Helen Ansell, a professor at Northwestern and the first author of the paper on this finding, said, quote, "An everyday example of this is when ice melts into water. It's still water molecules, but they are undergoing a transition from solid to liquid. We certainly are not saying that the brain is near melting." In fact, we don't have a way of knowing what two phases the brain could be transitioning between, because if it were on either side of the critical point, it wouldn't be a brain. Ain't evolution grand? So how did they arrive at this conclusion? Well, they studied, quote, "publicly available 3D brain images of humans, mice, and fruit flies." So according to what they found in all three cases, the brains, and keep in mind that the brain of a fruit fly is about the size of a small human neuron, the brains all appear to be at criticality, which is that knife's edge of transition previously mentioned. Two specific findings drive this conclusion. First, they found variety in different neuron segments. And nope, I don't know what that is either. They found broad size distribution among neurons. But more importantly, secondly, at the nanoscale level, they found fractal patterns where the small sections of the fractal resembles the entire fractal pattern. So I told you about a book I read last year entitled Fractals, The Secret Code of Creation, written by Jason Lyle. It had some amazing nanoscale photographs showing various fractals from various things, and to think that this all just happened by random chance just displays the delusion to believe a lie that so many people are under. So a fractal, to somewhat simplify it, think of a snowflake. When you zoom up on the snowflake, clearly it has a very definitive pattern. Then if you zoom up on each branch of that snowflake, you'll find very distinct patterns repeated on each branch, and often each branch is a copy of a section of the entire flake, or a pattern based off of the entire flake. And if you zoom up on each of those little sections, you'll see the patterns repeat, etc., etc., etc. Well, apparently they're seeing this type of pattern with cells inside of our brains. Another member of the study, Istvan Kovacs, said, quote, "These are things we see in all critical systems in physics. It seems the brain is in a delicate balance between two phases." A delicate balance. And the fact that they see this in the brains of humans, mice, and somehow fruit flies, all brains massively different in size, could be an indicator that all brains entirely are being held in some sort of delicate balance between two states of matter, neither of which we can identify nor do we understand. So, of course, the plan is to do more research on more organisms with brains. So Democrats are obviously excluded from the study. Oh no, I actually went there. Oh, I'm just kidding. Sort of. Anyway, quote, the researchers say their findings could help reshape statistical models of the brain and possibly inform the development of neural networks in computers. So what have we learned here? Well, first, the brain is sitting on a knife's edge between two states of matter. Second, we don't know what those two states of matter are. Third, if it tipped to either state rather than sit on that knife's edge, it wouldn't be a brain, because fourth, it's being held in a very delicate balance. And again I ask, ain't evolution grand? So how can legitimate scientists believe the brain evolved, you may ask? Well, it's because they're not legitimate scientists. It's really that simple. And I know, look, they're very smart people. They did the time, they have the degrees, they know the formulae, they understand the scientific method, they talk the talk, they publish papers in their infinity journals, they wear lab coats and pocket protectors, but they don't actually do science. Because as I've said many times before, real science analyzes what they test and observe from all possible angles. These individuals perform science within the boundaries they've set, but their boundaries are set to keep them within an unobservable, untestable, unprovable belief system, a faith-based system of belief, if you will, because they're adherents to the religion of evolutionism, and within that they perform their science, so-called. But in no other field would that be allowed. Case in point, if Elon Musk believed rockets could be made out of cardboard, insisted that SpaceX make their rockets out of cardboard, he'd be an abject failure. He'd have nobody wasting time with him. He'd be looked at as a complete nut job. No matter how much he believes it, doesn't make it true. Now, if Musk, instead of insisting, asked the question, could cardboard rockets work? I mean, fireworks use cardboard and plastic. Why not big rockets? If he insisted that it be legitimately analyzed, well, there's nothing wrong with that. May seem silly to you and me, but that's science. Do the calculations, work up a design, maybe even perform a trial of some sort. If it works, why, that'd be amazing, I guess. But if it doesn't work, okay, abandon it. Move on to more conventional materials and designs. That's doing science. The theory of evolution in itself is fine. It's one theory as to how everything started. Now test it. But don't test it within itself. Test it against all possible explanations, then let the results speak for themselves. But that's not what we do. So we come back to a brain that's delicately balanced between who knows what, and if it wasn't balanced, it wouldn't be a brain, and their agreed upon explanation is that random chance did it over a long period of time. Well, how many people were there without brains that went through life and produced offspring until someone with a brain finally popped up and found another brained person and had brainy children? Or if this happened way back with the earliest brained organism, how did evolution know to keep that brain delicately balanced? Science says this is impossible, which is, in my opinion, God showing man, in the things that have been made, that he is clearly and obviously the creator God. In fact, from just a few weeks ago, May of 2024, found on neurosciencenews.com, headline, AI uncovers hidden differences in male and female brain structures. But remember, there's no way to define a woman, and by default a man. It's all about how you feel. It has nothing to do with your biology or anatomy, except that it's coded in absolutely everything about us. Again, God showing us, if we were to actually do science correctly, that we are quite obviously, carefully, and wonderfully and specifically made. So in this case, some researchers at NYU Langone, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Health, used AI to analyze brain white matter through MRI results down to the cellular level. This white matter, the brain's innermost layer, was analyzed through thousands of MRIs of 471 men and 560 women. The AI program was able to accurately tell which scan was male and which was female because of distinct, quote, patterns in structure and complexity that were invisible to the human eye. To verify, because I mean, look, AI is interesting, but in my opinion, it's really not to be trusted. Definitely not to be taken at face value. So to verify the results, they ran the same test through 3 different AI systems, and the results came back the same every time. This is science. This is an example of real, actual science, despite the fact that the article keeps using the term biological sex, and we know why they do that. So the hope is that by using this kind of technology, this kind of ability, they can correlate certain issues such as migraines, autism, multiple sclerosis, and other psychiatric and neurologic disorders with the brain scans and with the sex and start to piece together what exactly may be going on that's causing these issues. Of course, the overall goal would be to stop these things from happening or limiting or countering the effects, or if you're big pharma, the hope is that you can make $1 bazillion by giving everyone a shot or by creating pills. Don't actually make a person better, just kind of mask the symptoms while making the person come back for more for their entire life. But surely that's not true. Going even further, the research team stated that they'd like to add in other factors such as hormones and environmental and societal factors to see if or how those affect the brain and the issues in question. Now, if you were to ask this research team if they believed evolution or creation, the odds are very high that they would side with evolution. So the boundaries they've set would be unscientific. But within their boundaries, they're doing real science. Okay, let's contrast that with an article from June 2024, found on ScienceAlert.com, headline, "Why did primates evolve big brains? It might not be the reason you think." Now, what you're going to hear at this point is not science. It'll sound sciencey, it'll use the right words, but they've set their boundaries unscientifically, and they will analyze their hypothesis unscientifically, which will result in a very sciencey sounding, unscientific conclusion. As to the question they pose, why did primates evolve big brains? Well, they didn't. Spoiler alert here. They were created with their brains. And sure, there has been variation within the kind. Some variations getting smaller than the original, some larger, and it's a product of God's design that when the body and the head get bigger, so does the brain. If the variation, the species gets smaller, so does the brain. Think about dogs. Per the creation narrative, God created dogs. I'm sure that in the time between creation and the flood, there was at least some variation that had taken place within the dog kind. 1,500 years is a lot of generations of dogs for there to not be some variation. Now, there were likely only a pair of dogs taken on the ark, maybe a few different pairs, depending on the level of variation or speciation inside that 1,500 years. But from the pair or handful of pairs that were on the ark to today, about 4,500 years or so later, we get the Mastiff and the Great Dane, and also the Poodle and the Chihuahua. There is nothing in the theory of evolution that says as the dog goes from, say, a wolf size to Mastiff or Chihuahua size, the body, the head, the brain, the internal organs, the limbs, etc. must all scale up or down in size at the same time. Evolution could have a large head and a small brain, or a large brain and a small head. Both of those, very bad. It could have a small head, a large body, or vice versa. Maybe a Chihuahua body with Mastiff legs. I mean, why not? Evolution is random, right? It's random chance mutations. It doesn't think. It doesn't plan ahead. It doesn't have logic or reason. It just randomly mutates. But for some reason, evolution is like, nah, I'll just scale everything up or down at the same time. Well, that's not how it works. But let's see what this article has to tell us. Let us lay prostrate, or prostate, either or, at the feet of the God of evolutionism, shall we? We'll do it. Prostrate thyself. Very good. They start off with the very basic trope of, 'cause of our big old brains, we be smarter than most mammals. So I'd say that yes, our brains are relatively big, especially compared to smaller brains. And we're not smarter than most, we're smarter than all other creatures. But brain size has really nothing to do with it, as there are creatures with very, very large brains that aren't as smart as creatures with very, very small brains. This is a product of design, but I digress. Quote, "The leading hypothesis for how primates evolve large brains involves a feedback loop. Smarter animals use their intelligence to find food more efficiently, resulting in more calories, which provides the energy to power a large brain. Support for this idea comes from studies that have found a correlation between brain size and diet, more specifically, the amount of fruit in an animal's diet." Now, they go on to say that because fruit ripens at different times, the smarter animals will find the ripe fruit at the right time and will, quote, evolve large brains. The study in question, recently published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B, which I'm not sure why they didn't get it into the Proceedings of the Royal Society A, but that's obviously why I didn't see this until now, as I can't afford to subscribe to both Proceedings of the Royal Society, both A and B journals, and my mailbox would never hold both of those. Anyway, this study lays out this smart animal fruit-eating, big-brain-growing theory with their key assumption, quote, that species with larger brains are more intelligent and therefore can find food more efficiently. So their hypothesis and assumption, again, goes back to brain size equals intelligence, and I don't know how they can make that claim with a straight face, except for the fact that they limit their scope to only primates, and this is what I mentioned before. Within their small slice of so-called expertise, they can make whatever claim they'd like, but if you broaden the scope out just a bit, the brain size equals intelligence thing kind of falls apart. On a large scale, I found one site that listed out types of creatures by intelligence. Horses are intelligent. I think we can all agree that they're relatively smart, but not as smart as birds. The octopus is actually more intelligent than a bird, but a dog is smarter, with whales and dolphins smarter than the dog. But monkeys are smarter than whales and dolphins, and great apes top this short list. The brains, starting with the horse, got smaller than larger, then smaller, and then larger, then smaller, then larger. And I feel like God is just toying with evolutionists at this point. Back to our primates. And you're going to want to sit down for this one. Let me just say this. By the time I got to the end of the relatively short article, I took off my reading spectacles and just kind of rubbed my eyes and temples for about 30 seconds. We can't say they wasted ink on this study. I mean, we don't waste ink on things anymore, but wow, did they waste a massive amount of time, and I have no doubt money and electrons and ones and zeros. No doubt both private funds and public tax dollars were probably wasted, as this was spearheaded by a professor at James Cook University. Thankfully, that university is in Australia, but still, and I mean, let's be honest, somehow our American tax dollars had to be involved with this. Okay, let's run through this thing, shall we? So bottom line is that they wanted to test foraging by primates with different brain sizes, but you can't really do this in a lab setting because the distances for foraging are wrong, and you need to train animals what to look for and where to look for it. So, quote, in our study, we took advantage of a natural phenomenon in Panama that occurs when the normally complex fruit puzzle shrinks to just a few species of ripe fruit over a 3-month period. During this time, all fruit-eating mammals are forced to focus on one tree species, Dipteryx oleifera, also called the almendro. This is a hardwood timber tree which has an almond-flavored edible seed, very oily seed pods. Apparently, the seed pod is thick and woody, which surrounds the seed. I mean, think again, almonds, right? And the seed pod is encased in a thin layer of sweet green pulp. They stand 40 to 50 meters tall, which I think is around 1 million miles, but I'm not sure about the gibberish to American conversion on that one. You can look that up on your own if you'd like. And it sports bright purple flowers for the summer fashion season. So here's what they did. They used drones to fly over Panama during the flowering season to map all the purple flower patches, which would tell them where the trees are that in a few months would produce this sweet, brain-evolving fruit. Then they terrorized a total of 40 animals consisting of larger-brained primates, namely spider monkeys and white-faced capuchins, and smaller-brained raccoon relatives, the white-nosed coatis and kinkajous. They strapped GPS tracking collars on these animal boys and released them back into the wild to tell stories of alien abduction to their families and not be believed, and to finally end up on some forest animal talk show like a crazy monkey. Then the researchers tracked these fellas to see how they solved this complex fruit puzzle, and here's the thing. They show their map of these almendro trees across Panama, and they're like flipping everywhere. I mean, yeah, there are some patches of no trees, sure. There are some patches with clusters of trees. I get that. But it's not like they're only in a few areas of the country. I mean, they're scattered everywhere on this map. This doesn't seem like that much of a puzzle, if we're being honest. Okay, I know. I'm cynical. Let's continue. The GPS trackers reported positions of these guys every 4 minutes, which that's a long time for modern-day GPS trackers. But okay, 4 minutes, meaning the research team didn't actually know where they went. They knew point A and B and C, and had to, quote, extrapolate their location between GPS fixes. Now, they were trying to determine how rapidly each type of animal found the trees, got in there, got out, with the theory that the bigger-brained, smarter primates would get there early and quickly, and get their necessary calories, and get out of there. So when they say they extrapolated their GPS fixes, I don't see this as drawing a straight line between points. This sounds to me like they kind of made some assumptions, like if a kinkajou passed by a grove from point A to B, he probably didn't stop in for some fruit, silly little brain thing. But if a spider monkey passed by, he being smarter, probably made a stop in for a little snacky snack. So that to me sets up a real data issue. Let's ignore that and move on. They said that some of these little beasts would actually sleep in the trees. That's like me sleeping in Kroger or Five Guys, which, honestly, maybe these primates are pretty smart. Thankfully, these collars, which were probably unobtrusive and fashionable, tracked activity so they could be fairly sure when these things were asleep. So taking this GPS data and their magical tree map, making assumptions, removing CPC time, they calculated the route efficiency of each of the 40 traumatized animals. Quote, if larger-brained animals use their intelligence to more efficiently visit fruit trees, we would expect the big-brained primates in our study to have more efficient foraging routes. That's not what we found. No, don't massage your temples yet. We're not done. They found that the larger-brained monkeys did not have more efficient routes than the small-brained non-primates, quote, which puts a serious dent in the fruit diet hypothesis of brain evolution. You think? And you don't want to dent your brain, let's just be honest here. Making the assumption that the larger-brained, smarter monkeys would wake up hungry like I do, head straight for food, like I do, and then spend the rest of the day just kind of chillaxing, like I do, quote, when looking at these first 2 to 4 hours of the day, we found the same result. Monkeys were not more efficient than non-primates. And that's the study. That's the result. Hypothesis shattered. Hopes and dreams probably shattered. But that's not all. Oh, no, because if there's one thing we know, researchers are very good at figuring out very direct foraging routes to that yummy study cache. So they asked the question we've all been waiting for, quote, why the big brains then? Well, they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you their speculations and guesses, and they're going to tell you nothing at all, to be honest. Quote, perhaps it has to do with memory. If species with larger brains have better episodic memory, they might be able to optimize the timing of fruit tree visits to get more food. Preliminary analyses of our data set didn't support this explanation, but we'll need more detailed studies to test this hypothesis. Money. Quote, intelligence might be linked to tool use, which could help an animal extract more nutrients from their environment. Of our 4 study species, the white-faced capuchin monkey is the only one that's been observed using tools, and it also has the largest brain, relative to body size. Wait, so hold up. Notice they threw in relative to body size. Of course, you notice I made it obvious on this theory. Where did that come from? That's not something they mentioned before. And with regard to how that statement was phrased, listen carefully, quote, intelligence might be linked to tool use, which could help an animal extract more nutrients. The implication of that, of course, is that the more nutrients would grow the brain size and increase the intelligence, which would lend to the tool use. So what came first, the intelligence or the tool use? They've set up a chicken and an egg scenario here. It's a circular logic problem they've got. Can you see the unscientific process collapsing in on them? Quote, our study could also lend support to the hypothesis that brain size increased to handle the complexities of living in a social group. But wait, so now brain growth and evolution isn't a function of nutrients? Just, a natural result of better nutrition? And if that's the case, my brain disappeared way back when I worked for Hardee's and ate a lot of Hardee's. Now I want some Hardee's. Now evolution is directed and purposeful. The brain grew and got more smarterer because it determined it needed to in order to hang with the boys. And apparently that doesn't apply to humans, because have you seen the social groups today? I'm not sure in an entire social circles that there are two brain cells to rub together, let alone two brains. And if brain size equals intelligence, and we perform scientific observational studies on these social groups, one would have to infer that those brain cases, complete wasteland, not even a tumbleweed. Sorry, brain digression. And this next paragraph is where the brain started to throb a little bit for myself. Thankfully, we're nearly done here. Quote, large brains have evolved in an assortment of vertebrates, dolphins, parrots, crows, and invertebrates, octopuses, and I don't like that word. While our study can't determine the exact drivers of brain evolution in all of these species, we have directly tested a key assumption on wild tropical mammals in a relatively non-invasive manner. Their study can't determine the exact drivers of brain evolution in all of these species. They haven't determined a single broad driver of any brain evolution in any species at all. They literally proved nothing. Well, not nothing, but nothing based on the unscientific boundaries of evolutionism they've bound themselves to. And their final statement, the bow on this gift of scientism, if you will, and you most certainly will, quote, we've demonstrated that by using the latest sensor technologies, we can test big hypotheses about the evolution, psychology, and behavior of animals in their natural environment. Yeah, we knew this could be done decades ago. We've been tagging and tracking animals for many decades now. They were banding bird legs since 1890. They were clipping scales off of snakes to create a very distinctive scar since the 1930s. And skipping ahead a few generations, we've been GPS tracking animals since the 1990s. They proved nothing, at least as far as the tracking of animals. At best, they proved that, hey, yeah, this technology still works. It's great. With regard to the testing of evolution and psychology of animals in their natural environment, what did they prove? They specifically said that they did not prove their evolutionary brain theory. In fact, the only thing their study proved is that they don't know what they're talking about. But that's not an acceptable answer. They had to say they did or prove something, in order to justify the money that was spent. Oh, and to get more money. That's what they proved, is that they like money. Okay. Permission to remove your spectacles if you'd like, if you wear them, and go ahead and rub those eyes now for a few seconds. So why did primates evolve big brains? Well, they can't answer their own question because the boundaries of only evolution they've placed their science, so-called, within doesn't work. And the hypothesis and study they did, based firmly on only the theory of evolutionism, can't answer their question because it's a nonsense question, studied in a nonsense way, based on a nonsense premise within the boundaries of nonsense. And this, my friends, is presented as science. Now, real science wouldn't ask, why did the primates evolve big brains? It would ask, did the bigger brains of primates evolve, or were they designed and created that way? And then they could do various tests and studies and unavoidably come to the conclusion that the theory of evolution is unprovable and frankly silly. Primates didn't evolve anything. They were designed and created. There can be, as I've said before, somewhat larger and somewhat smaller variations of the created kind. There can be a loss of information over time, which creates some speciation within that kind over many generations. But that's it. They have the brains they do, the instincts they do, because God created them that way. Some were created smarter, some dumber. And why? Because that's how God did it. And I don't know why. In summary, we learned that we don't know what the brain is or how it's maintaining the delicate balance it is. We just know that evolution did it. And if it didn't do it, our brains would cease to be. This can only exist because God created it that way. There's no natural explanation that will ever unlock this miraculous mystery. We also learned that men and women are different, and the brain proves it. Just another data point proving that statement to be true. Despite what man wants to claim, that gender is fluid and trans men are men and trans women are women, no, they're not. Absolutely everything except degenerate, mentally and spiritually sick emotions and feelings unequivocally prove that God created men and women very differently, despite the obvious similarities. And we learned that brains evolved, but we don't know how. And hey, look over there! If scientists actually did science, major fields of science would necessarily disappear. But along with those fields, our perception of freedom, read that as the ability to do whatever we want within the bounds of man-made, sin-cursed laws, and outside those laws if we don't get caught, those freedoms disappear. And we would have to admit that we are all owned and under subjugation to the singular, Most High God and King of this creation, and therefore bound to his laws, and we simply can't allow that to be. Okay. You sat through that with me. I appreciate not being alone for this. Now, go straight to the kitchen or your favorite foraging location and reward your brain with some ice cream or popcorn or sweet, green, pulpy fruit covering a very oily seed pod inside of which is a delicious almondy seed. When is a human not a human? When he's a guinea pig, of course. Yeah, it's not really funny, especially if I retell it at the end of the segment. We all know that the Nazis were inhuman monsters. It's pretty clear, except for the few percent that still agree with Hitler and saying he had the right idea. I mean, actually, these days, that percentage seems to be a whole lot higher of people. I don't know, just most of the brain-dead college students who have no idea what they're protesting or why or what it means or where they are or what they're doing in life or how anything works at all, anywhere, at all times. But those who truly side with Hitler are still a relatively small percentage of the population. Anyway, the point I was making is that Nazis were absolutely horrible human beings. We know they killed 6 million Jews, as well as millions more homosexuals, gypsies, those labeled as degenerates, the physically or mentally handicapped, and so many others. And before they just started killing people, they forcefully sterilized tens of thousands of, I believe mostly women, but don't quote me on that one, so that they couldn't reproduce, because again, they were undesirable. You know, they were trying to create the perfect race, and if you want the perfect race, you can't let the undesirables breed. You must cull the weak and the infirm, the sickly, the stupid, and so on. And we also know that they performed some horrendous experiments on humans, babies all the way up. I won't go into them here. If you know, you'll appreciate that I don't go into it here. If you don't know, well, you can look it up, but do that at your own risk. We further know that at the end of World War II, we, the United States, brought a lot of Nazi scientists and doctors back to the United States to learn from them. I put a link in the notes for Operation Paperclip. You can start there and work your way into that if you'd like. The irony is that the Nazis, well, they learned from us prior to World War II. See, the United States does not have clean hands in history. Planned Parenthood was just another operation of our eugenics movement, which was an attempt to make the perfect race, mostly by getting rid of the blacks and the disabled, the infirm, the mentally and physically handicapped. Boy, it sounds the same. In fact, on the stand after World War II ended, Nazi scientists and doctors said that they got the ideas from us and just expanded them. And they're right. Now, let me caveat this real quick. The United States has done amazing good in the world. We have lifted entire cultures and countries out of poverty. We've defended the weak. We've taken in those who didn't have a home with very strict requirements, mind you. We didn't just fling the doors wide open, like we've done today. We've allowed people a place to practice their religion freely as long as their freedom to worship doesn't impinge on anyone else's freedom to worship or not to worship or to just live. The United States and our constitutional republic form of government, we're not a democracy, never have been. Founding fathers despised democracies because they always ended up destroying their host country by eating it alive from the inside. Anyway, this constitutional republic has resulted in the most free, the most prosperous, the most diverse, the most giving nation in the history of the world. But all that said, we do have a dark side to us, and that's usually attributed to those we've elected to lead us. I'm sure we have evil people in the country in general, as does every country in the world, because we live in a world of sin, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. So what am I talking about, and why did I start with this downer? Well, just as we were trying to make the perfect race before the Nazis were trying to make the perfect race, we were also experimenting on humans before the Nazis were experimenting on humans, and we're still doing it. Found on MSN.com, headline, Pentagon slammed over woke plan to use U.S. troops as guinea pigs to eat lab-grown meat. Now, I've spoken about lab-grown meat before. Bottom line, this is meat, and you'll want to just slather the scare quotes around that word. meat that is grown in a lab from animal cell cultures using a chemical soup to promote growth. I likened it to a tumor because it's a tumor. I mean, they're growing tumors. They're shaping it into shapes and adding flavoring and color, not to mention, the chemical-laden soup that it's growing in, and then they pass it off to humans as meat. It's not meat. It's not exactly Soylent Green, but how far off are we from that really at this point? And how would we know? Anyway, now the reason we're doing this isn't because we're running out of food or specifically livestock. It's not that we can't feed the military, which is struggling to fill the quotas they want to fill. So we can send more of our young men and women to go fight in more wars for either no reason whatsoever or more likely no good reasons, nefarious reasons. No, it's not because of that. It's because we must save the planet from the ravages of things like cow farts, because those are causing the planet to just warm out of control. And it's hot today, so that proves global warming. So to me, the idea of eating an animal culture chemical meat tumor is kind of gross. Additionally, we have no real data on this, and that's really probably my biggest problem with it. I mean, look, I'm a big proponent of chemicals. I work and have worked in the chemical industry for nearly 2 decades now. I believe that, like most things, chemicals aren't inherently evil or bad or wrong. It's how you make them and how you use them. This world, regardless or despite your perspective, is inundated with chemicals, and your life would not be the same without said chemicals. That said, can we please just stop? There used to be a time when we actually did a lot of trials. We created something and went through years of testing and trials, working from animal trials to human trials, but in very slow increments, collecting data, trying to determine exactly what this new thing will do in the long term. We've given up on that, apparently, and now we think something up. Scientist gets out his or her cauldron and finds the canisters and beakers on the old rickety wooden shelves and dumps the ingredients into the huge black pot, stirs it with that large wooden spoon. An explosion occurs with the mushroom cloud, and then he ladles it up into a tiny bottle and hands it to a white-coated doctor or pharmacist, apparently, to inject into someone. This is not literally, of course, but exactly what did they do with the COVID vax? We're not far off here. We could argue about if the COVID virus was released with a purpose to experiment on people. But the vax was definitely forced on humanity with almost no short-term effect data and absolutely no long-term data. But we were all told that it had no side effects, it'll be fine. And around the world, those words are being very carefully and deliberately walked back right now. The global population was turned into guinea pigs. I fear with AI at the helm telling us what we can mix together under the assumption that our benevolent AI overlords have thought through every angle so that we don't have to worry about it, we're going to go down this route more and more every day. Back to our brave men and women sacrificing their lives, literally, and sometimes very literally, to keep us free, and everything else they're being told to do that has nothing to do with our freedom or safety. Do we really want to take these young, strong individuals and shove chemically grown meat tumors onto their plates? Because I, for one, do not want to do that thing. It gets worse. The company making the tumors is called Biomade. They're sponsored and funded by our Department of Defense. From what I can find, they launched as a company in 2021, got less than $100 million from the DoD for the first few years. What's $100 million between friends? And then last year they got a slight bump up, a little bit, of $450 million more to put them well over $500 million per year to make, quote, biomanufactured proteins, chemicals, fabrics, rubber, and more. So says their CEO, Dr. Douglas Friedman. Wonder if he's a doctor like Fauci is a doctor, because if that's the case, no thanks. That piece of paper that you hold, it doesn't necessarily make you a doctor. I don't care what it says. Anyway, they now want to move into growing food for soldiers using, quote, novel cell culture methods suitable for the production of cultivated meat protein. Or so says the announcement they released. And wow, does that sound good, right? I mean, I'd rather feed our men and women Chef Boyardee. I mean, we don't know what meat those meatballs are made of, but we're fairly sure that it's at least an animal meat. Going on in the announcement, the plan is the, quote, production of nutrient-dense military rations via fermentation process and, quote, utilizing one carbon molecule, C1 feedstocks, for food production. I don't know what that last bit means, and I don't actually care. I just know that I don't like this at all. The article rightly points out that this lab-grown meat tumor is still experimental, and it's somewhat controversial with questions about the morality of it, and yeah, I would think so. Thankfully, there are some who find this to be reprehensible, experimenting on our military personnel with this experimental garbage, as well as funding it with taxpayer dollars. But this is an agenda-driven item. We must reduce the military's carbon footprint, to save the world. And to that I say they can, well, no, I'll be kind here, they can pound sand. One thing we can be sure of, the commander-in-chief, such as he is, and the military officers won't be eating the meat tumors, will they? No, sir, they will not. So let me ask you this. If this goes through, if they start doing this, and it'll probably be a year or so before they can actually ramp up to full production, how shocked would you be to hear about a whole bunch more of, sudden adult deaths, or a rash of various cancers, or nervous system, or brain issues, or whatever? I think our men and women deserve better than this. But here's the thing. This isn't new. As I said, our governmental masters have been experimenting on American citizens for decades, for over a century at least by this point. I would argue that most of us haven't heard of most of these experiments. I'd also argue that all or nearly all of these experiments were considered to be conspiracy theories until they weren't. It kind of sounds like the last couple of years, doesn't it? I've lost track of how many so-called conspiracy theories in only the last few years have now been proven true, or mostly true, or maybe they're in the process of being proven true. And although both those on the right and the left are responsible, and I'd say culpable, guilty even, it seems like a lot of these things seem to happen during Democrat presidencies when you line up the years. Just saying. If you look up U.S. experiments on citizens or something like that in your favorite search engine, you'll find an almost endless number of results. I found a few articles that I'd like for us to work through because we need to know, on the right or the left, who exactly our government is and how they view us. The average nobodies, right? You and me. Not to try to claim they're all in on it, not to claim that we're all in grave danger just all of the time. Not to say we need another revolution. I mean, we do, but not from this, at least maybe not yet. Just to say that our system of government still allows us to vote in people who are generally better than other people we could vote in. We need to be less concerned with R's and D's and start looking at who these people are. What do they believe? Not what they say they believe. What do they actually believe by their words and their actions? So, found on listverse.com, headline, Top 10 U.S. Government Experiments Done on Its Own Citizens. I also found on ahrp.org, standing for the Alliance for Human Research Protection, just kind of a rolling, scrolling list of human experiments conducted by the United States. And finally, I found on thelineup.com, headline, 13 Horrifying Cases of Human Experimentation. I'm going to walk through some of these. I'll leave the rest for you to explore on your own, if you'd really like to, but I think it's important to know that even the United States has a very dark side to it. And if you think these stopped decades ago, I think you'd be very, very naive. Again, not saying this to try to disparage the country. In fact, looking back in past eras, we need to be careful about how we judge them based on what was and wasn't known. But human life is supposed to be precious, and this country, arguably the best, most free, most moral country ever, at least in the 80s, is no different than any other country. This, again, let me stress this again is why we must vote and vote carefully and take our votes seriously, doing everything we can to ensure that we know who we're voting in, and if that person isn't who we thought, we vote them out at the first opportunity. Anyway, let's start working our way through some of these. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, 600 poor black men, all sharecroppers, in Macon County, Alabama, were told that in return for being in a study for 6 months, they'd get free medical treatment for their, quote, bad blood. There were actually 399 of these men who had syphilis and 201 that did not. Over the next 40 years, not 6 months, through the public health system, funded by American taxpayer dollars, these men were treated with nothing. They were given placebos, bogus treatments, etc., while the effects of syphilis were studied on these people. By 1945, penicillin became widely available, and by 1947, it was the drug of choice to fairly quickly take care of syphilis. But none of these men were ever given penicillin. In fact, they weren't allowed to even opt out of this study either. You know, the 40-year-long study, the 6-month-long, 40-year-long study. Instead, they were given free healthcare and free burial services. How kind. In 40 years, 28 patients had died directly from syphilis, 100 died from complications related to syphilis, 40 of the patients' wives were infected with syphilis, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. This started under Hoover, a Republican, as president, and went through 4 Democrats, 1 Republican, and then was stopped, or was actually defunded under Nixon. In 1972, this ongoing experiment was leaked to the press, which resulted in it being shut down in November of that year. Moving on, the Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study. In the 1940s, think FDR and Truman, both Democrats, as president, our U.S. government performed a malaria study where 400 prisoners were illegally infected with malaria with the goal of finding a cure for malaria. Likely to shield themselves to some degree, speaking of the government, of course, the prisoners actually ran the show. They decided who would be infected. Prisoners did the infecting of the selected prisoners, and prisoners documented the study. In fact, as incentives, some of the prisoners were offered reduced time, and it was the prisoners in charge who decided who would receive that reduction in sentence. The experimental drugs that they were given were often horrific, with terrible and in many cases irreversible side effects. But this was fine. These were only prisoners, and this was viewed as something for the greater good. But let me ask you, are these humans? I believe the criminal justice system for too long has been soft. I'm a firm believer in the death penalty, swiftly. Now, no sitting around for 40 years exhausting appeal after appeal. No, I mean, this needs to move quickly. I'm actually okay with a punishment in death that fits the crime in life. In other words, I'm not necessarily opposed to cruel and unusual if that's the type of crime they committed, but to simply say that as prisoners they have less than human status so we can experiment on them and see what happens, I mean, that is literally Nazi-like and dehumanizing experimentation, right? Moving on to the Navy-sponsored beef blood transfusions. In 1942, FDR era, again, the U.S. Navy contracted a biochemist at Harvard to perform this secret project trying to discover a possible biological weapon. Now, we've been playing with bioweapons for a long time now. Now, I don't know the specifics, but the bottom line, they were trying to detect a certain protein that could be used in the event of an upcoming war, which FDR definitely knew we were already in. So they injected 64 prisoners with beef blood, didn't find the protein, and ended up causing catastrophic injury to all 64 victims, ending in death for all of them. They did actually find soon after that the protein could be detected in human blood. They never had to do what they were doing. Next is plutonium testing in the mid-1940s. FDR and Truman again. So this was the start of the atomic bomb age. We didn't know what the effects of nuclear radiation would be on humans, so the government decided to test some American citizens. They used, at least in large part, terminally ill patients and injected them with plutonium. Oh, I almost forgot. The test subjects were never told what was being done. The test results were inconclusive since the patients died, but they were already terminally ill, so, I mean, who knows, right? The problem, of course, is the fact that we felt we should experiment on humans without their knowledge. World War II mustard gas experiments. During World War II, I wish I knew who the president was during that time. No way for me to know. Anyway, about 60,000 of our own soldiers were used as guinea pigs to test gas masks and protective clothing. Mostly white soldiers, but some black and some Japanese were also used to test the effects, on different types of skin. These tests were conducted in the field by releasing gas in open areas and were also done in gas chambers to control the concentration and exposure. Some soldiers were the control, meaning they were offered no protective gear, just to see what the effect may be on them. MK Ultra. Now, this was denied for a long, long time, but we now know that the conspiracy theory is absolutely true. Bottom line, the Nazis were experimenting with various drugs to create a truth serum to interrogate prisoners after the war in conjunction with Operation Paperclip. Remember bringing the Nazi scientists to America? The CIA continued this experimentation on American citizens. This is a decades-long massive slate of experimentation on Americans, but as one example, there was one operation called Operation Midnight Climax. Ugh. In this one, the CIA used government-employed prostitutes to lure random men into CIA safe houses where they were given LSD and alcohol, while the CIA watched the effects through a two-way mirror, of course. There was little control. The CIA treated it like a party, and there was no oversight. In other experiments, they dosed unsuspecting victims with ecstasy, mescaline, if I'm saying that right or not, heroin, barbiturates, methamphetamines, and psilocybin, or, shrooms. Then we have Operation Sea Spray. At the end of 1950, unbeknownst to the citizens of San Francisco, the U.S. Army released a bacteria into the air to test how it would affect the population. This was a test to determine the possibility of biological warfare near the West Coast. By the end of the test, a total of 6 different bacteria releases were conducted, causing many people to die and many more to endure torturous hospital stays trying to recover from something they had no idea their own government was doing to them. Oh, and their conclusion? Yeah, it's likely for a coastal city to be affected by biological warfare. Did we have to kill people to determine this? Or could we have just used logic and common sense to say, yeah, that would probably work? Operation Big Buzz. In 1955, similar to Sea Spray, the U.S. government released millions of a type of mosquito that's known to be a carrier of yellow fever into Georgia parks, although these were supposedly clean mosquitoes at the time. I'm assuming they gave them little nose swab PCR tests to ensure that they weren't sick, before they released them into these parks in Georgia. Now, these mosquitoes, of course, quickly flooded the suburbs. The goal was to see if insects could be an effective delivery system for a biological warfare attack. Government officials disguised as healthcare officials recorded the mosquito bite data. The article notes that this test was repeated with Operation Dropkick, which again tested mosquitoes in Georgia, and a similar test was conducted, I'm not sure exactly where, didn't care to look it up, called Operation Big Itch, where they released fleas into the public to determine if fleas would be an effective delivery system. And I guess the conclusion was, they kind of go where they go, it'd be effective. Again, common sense. The Willowbrook experiments. Now, this took place from 1956 to 1970 under the guise of finding a cure for hepatitis. So they grabbed mentally handicapped children from the Willowbrook State School, infected them with hepatitis if they weren't already, then injected them with various experimental drugs to see if they could cure them, is what they said. Not only were the children too young to express consent, they were also mentally handicapped, and nearly all of them died from the experimental cures. The measles vaccine experiments. Now, this was the CDC trying to find a way to control measles outbreaks, as there was apparently a rising set of cases in certain locations in the U.S. at the time. Not really sure. They created a vaccine, because they wanted to see if it would be better than natural antibodies. And don't worry, they didn't inject it into Americans. Oh, no. They went to the third world countries and injected a bunch of babies with the vaccine. Yeah, it turns out it created a massive number of immune system problems, and it killed a bunch of babies. That's okay. They figured they'd try it on about 1,500 black and Hispanic babies in Los Angeles as well. They finally stopped the test after 3 years, when the data said that those third world babies were still dying at an alarming rate due to the vaccines. Sound familiar? Maybe we need to stop trying to vaccinate our way out of things. Maybe we need to stop playing with the biological or viral warfare. I know I'm the crazy one. Refrigeration experiments of mental patients. That one sounds fun. In the 1940s, first Harvard, then the University of Cincinnati, conducted experiments on patients in mental institutions. First, Harvard wanted to know what the effects of prolonged freezing temperatures was on a human, which sounds oddly Nazi-esque, as they did the same sort of thing. So Harvard would use patients from these mental hospitals, place them naked and slightly anesthetized between rubber mats that had embedded coils that circulated refrigerated fluid. They noted that vasoconstriction, or narrowing of the blood vessels, and shivering would slightly delay the drop in the rectal temperature of the victim. They also noted that the anesthetic would wear off in anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. Now, they use this information to then try using electroshock therapy while freezing them, given to psychotic patients in Massachusetts General Hospital. Now, there were a couple cardiac arrest deaths, break a few eggs. In 1943, the University of Cincinnati also tried using refrigeration to combat mental disease. They selected 16 mentally disabled patients and put them in 30-degree cabinets for 120 hours. 2 died from pneumonia. Others suffered severe additional mental issues, now upgrading from mental sickness to mental retardation, and several others experienced physical breakdown, as in like lifelong muscle loss and general body decay. In 1902, after the U.S. took over the Philippines, Army doctors decided to do some experimentation on Filipino patients. They infected them with the bubonic plague, they infected 24 inmates with cholera, killing 13 of them, and they withheld food from 29 prisoners to bring about beriberi from vitamin B1 deficiency, so they could study them. In 1955, the U.S. Army's Chemical and Biological Warfare Center sent the CIA whooping cough bacteria, which the CIA then released into the air outside of Tampa Bay, Florida. This experiment allegedly killed 12 people. Hard to find information on this one. In 1951, the U.S. Navy released fungal spores in the Norfolk Naval Supply Center in Virginia to see how they would infect the workers, mostly black workers unpacking crates. I only mention the skin color because the test was based on a theory that blacks were more susceptible to fungal disease than whites. In the 1950s, the U.S. sprayed, via aeroplane, zinc cadmium sulfide across St. Louis and Minneapolis to determine how it would disperse across the cities. They chose those specific cities since they were very similar in many ways to Soviet targets, such as Moscow. This was revealed to the public in 1997, but they stated there was no harm to anyone. Oddly, though, in 2012, a sociology professor who studied this experiment found that there was a spike in cancer rates that seems to correlate quite well with this chemical release. In 1962, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, authorized Project 112. This was a series of bioweapon tests carried out on American citizens. One such test took place in 1966 when scientists filled light bulbs with Bacillus globigii, probably said that wrong, then went into the New York subway system and smashed the light bulbs on the tracks. The subway trains and tunnels, of course, then carried the spores for miles inside the subway system, being breathed in by thousands of unsuspecting American citizens. Now, this was admitted to in 2008, over 40 years later, saying that likely tens of thousands of civilians may have been exposed to the bacteria. The U.S. Defense Department started trying to identify who might have been affected since 2003, and although they claim that nobody was harmed, many of those identified thus far apparently suffer from long-term medical conditions. Probably just coincidence. And the list goes on and on and on. As I stated at the beginning, the release of the COVID virus could be argued either way, intentional or not, and we probably won't know for 40 years what the actual truth is, but there's no doubt that as much as Big Pharma, Fauci, Birx, Trump, Biden, all the acronymed government agencies, the mainstream media, social media, etc., tried to tell us that the so-called vaccine was thoroughly tested, that it was 100% effective, had very minor short-term and no long-term effects, etc., that there was no doubt that the American people and the world at large were nothing but guinea pigs for this experimental chemical. And we're finding out how much we were lied to more and more every day. What about what's going on in limited capacity in America for now, but becoming the way of life in Canada? Assisted suicide. Do we really have any idea what we're doing? Are we diagnosing people correctly? Are we considering the long-term cascading effects on friends or family? And no, we're not. We're looking no farther than the nose on our faces, claiming compassion and empathy, completely ignoring humanity. But it's okay. We're right on the cusp of saving their mind through AI, so although they're dead, they can live forever with us, talk to us, and give us advice. Do we have any idea what we're doing with that? And no, again, we don't, but we're rolling it out because we can, not because we know if we should or not. What about the normalization, the very sudden, rapid normalization of transgenderism, including transing the kids? Moving past the absolute criminal degeneracy of the entire thing, there's very little data as to the efficacy of transitioning as it relates to mental health. In fact, the latest data claims that the suicide rate is 12 times that of the general population within the trans community. But remember, psychologists, the professionals are telling us that we must trans the kids in order to save them from committing suicide. Does this make sense? There's very little data on hormone blockers. There's short or long-term effects, although the data is coming back with major psychological, mental, physical, and health effects, like, the rising rate of various cancers and blood clots, etc. There's very little data on the effects of the physical mutilation that's occurring, but I think the suicide rates probably speak to this. All of this very limited data says that this is very, very bad, very bad. We're just experimenting on our children with this. And what about the normalization of drag queens, especially in relation to kids? That's a psychological experiment. We're definitely seeing a short-term effect. Skip back just a minute or two and re-listen to the transing the kids part. But what is the long-term effect of this perversion individually or within the family or on society as a whole? Let me say this. If you're a Christian who finds drag shows fun, who finds no problem with this, and per my Facebook feed and my very small group of Facebook friends, I can name about a half a dozen who fit into that category. I mean, at best, you need to repent of this, open your flipping eyes, wake up to what you seem to think somehow, I don't understand how, somehow is all in good fun. At worst, you may want to really closely examine yourself to be sure you're actually a child of God. I have questions. How about providing the oh-so-safe and effective and compassionate abortion drug of choice through the mail? Again, all indications say that this, ignoring the fact that it murders a human, hard to ignore, but let's ignore that, is very dangerous to the life of the mother and forces emergency room doctors and nurses to complete incomplete abortions, despite their personal views and stances on abortion. But our government doesn't care, just push the agenda. I mean, surely whatever negative effects comes of this experiment can be dealt with later, through pills or whatever. And again, this list goes on and on and on ad nauseum. Humans. Every single human who has ever or ever will be created is made in the image of God, imago Dei. As such, all humans have inherent value and worth. All humans are formed by God, cell by cell. All humans at all stages of life, from conception forward, are known personally by God. The Mosaic or Levitical law had a massive number of laws regarding how humans were to treat humans, all basically wrapped up and governed by the second of the great commandments, love your neighbor, meaning other humans, as you love yourself. This, of course, is not what has been on display in this segment because of sin in a fallen world, because of personal sins such as pride and arrogance, covetousness, a lust for power and control, and because now we look at humanity as an over-evolved plague on the planet. Well, humanity isn't viewed as unique or specially created or as being with intrinsic inherent worth. And as you could tell, generally stated, children, those considered degenerates, criminals, or mentally compromised, or those not of the preferred ethnic background, are most often chosen for the experimentation. They're considered to be invisible or of less worth, unlikely to be missed, simply disposable. The complication that I see is twofold. First, as not all of mankind, in fact, I'd argue a very small percentage of mankind, is actually Christians, can we expect those who are not Christians to treat humanity as Christians are commanded to treat each other? I'd like to say yes, but the reality is that no, we can't expect non-Christians to see inherent value and worth in human life. Combine that with the quest for knowledge, the natural, also inherent desire to understand the unknown, and you can easily find yourself in the realm of experimentation that clearly, in hindsight, if not in real time, is horrific. That said, as humans, in order to experiment on other humans in many of the ways described in the segment, one must willingly deny and harden his heart against what he knows to be true about fellow humans. If you wouldn't do this to yourself, why are you doing it to your neighbor? I have a very difficult time giving a pass for most of the experimentation described here, Christians or not. The other complication is that in order to develop medications or treatments, even something like a COVID vaccine, we must eventually perform human trials. To be as ethical and moral as possible, these should be performed with full consent after all possibilities known or suspected are clearly explained, consented to by adults able to fully understand what they're consenting to. I have no issue with offering this to prisoners, to the terminally ill, or perfectly healthy adults, young or old, as long as they're able to fully consent. I have a harder time accepting adults consenting to their children being used as guinea pigs, but eventually, human child trials must come into play as well. That's an entirely different discussion about when and how that should happen. What can never be excused are experiments on children, experiments that are counter to human dignity, that are disrespectful to God through the degradation or mutilation of his image bearers. The rushed rollout of the COVID vaccine could potentially be excused. Mutilating children under the guise of compassion cannot. Sadly, we see all through history that humans refuse to value other humans. We start with the first murder, Cain killing Abel, and we move very quickly into the devaluation of women, the sacrificing of children, slavery, brutality, torture, terrorism, genocide, etc. And we're no different today. We'd like to think we are. Nothing has really changed. We're more technologically advanced, sure. We talk a good game, put up a nice humanitarian facade, but all things are as they were. As Christians, we're called to love others as we love ourselves. We should be the first to be wary about, most things, to be honest. We should be weighing what we're told with the truth of the Scriptures. We should be the first to use the gifts of logic and reason that God's given us to evaluate what's presented to us as science and facts and progress. We should be willing to take a stand when needed, personally, or for our families, or for others, and definitely for those who aren't able to take the stand for whatever reason on their own. We should value compassion and justice and be able to distinguish between the two. We must be serious about who we place in leadership positions over us. Our pastors, we need to rid ourselves of the wolves, the charlatans, the hucksters, those preaching a social, satanic, human gospel, which incidentally looks no different than what we're being told by the world, but can't be found in the Bible anywhere. And our governmental representatives, we need to look into the words and actions of the candidates and then choose those who best align with our Christian beliefs. We shouldn't expect perfection and refuse to vote if we don't get the ideal. We vote for the best, which in most cases, at least right now, means voting for the lesser of two evils. In one generation, due to the voting cycles, we could completely change the direction of our country if we simply kept voting for the individual with the most Christian belief system, regardless of name recognition, party affiliation, best gotcha commercials, or political rhetoric. To not vote, especially these days, understanding the widening division between the two ideological views with regard to just about every topic, it may not be a sin, but as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, not to stand is to stand. What are you standing for? And who are you standing with? And if you're refusing to vote for some reason, which I'll never understand nor agree with, what and who are you standing for by your symbolic abstention? Christians, at least in the United States, have had a very easy life, and as such, we've fallen into a world of naive complacency. Well, it's time to wake up again. It's time to be who we're supposed to be. It is our job to judge. Don't let anyone tell you different. They're wrong. As Micah 6:8 says, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Loving our neighbor, fighting against those who see no value in the lives of others, that is our job. We should always be striving to love our neighbors as ourselves, regardless of what others say or do. Now, we have a chance coming up in November to take the first political step. We must not neglect our responsibility. If Christians won't stand up for fellow image bearers of God as unique creations by God with inherent intrinsic worth, who will? And I know that God can do as he pleases. But as it stands right now, if we allow America to continue to slip farther and farther into the darkness of anti-human demonic depravity that we're currently sliding into, what other entity with the power and influence of the United States is out there that could pick up that torch? So, Christians, this is our job. Okay, goal update time. We've rumbled, bumbled, stumbled into goal update number 6, 2024 edition. Now more 2024-ish than ever before. Think about it. So here's the thing. I was tracking all my data from Tuesday to Monday, but I drop new episodes early Monday morning, meaning they're complete sometime Sunday night, if not Saturday. Sometimes, most of the time I'm running right into Sunday night to get these things done. But what that means is that the data I'm tracking is just about a week behind the update. So I decided to modify my tracking days to Saturday to Friday in order to have more current data, because that just kind of makes better sense to me, I think. So, that said, I had to modify all my formulae in my tracking spreadsheet in order to track percentages correctly. Luckily, most of the formulae I set up were created so I could change one value in one location, and all the rest of the values and percentages would adjust accordingly. There's only one other spot I had to do a bit more manipulation, so I guess I can't complain too much. I mean, I will, but I probably shouldn't. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Starting with Well, I'm not really sure what my actual weight is. I mean, I took it last Friday, and I was down to 202.2 from 204.6 3.5 weeks prior. This Friday, I was 205.4, which is up 0.8 pounds from the last time, but I was on a business trip for some just wonderful training Tuesday through Thursday of this last week, and then to alleviate the stress, had a big old bowl of popcorn late Thursday night when I got home, and that always jacks my weight incorrectly high for a day, sometimes two, probably because of all the salt I put on it. So popcorn, combined with snacks during the week, the provided lunches, and a few, probably too large dinners on the company dime, yeah, all of that's bad. But my speculation is that I'm actually slightly down from the last update, not actually up, but only slightly, like less than a pound. Like if I hadn't eaten that popcorn, it probably would have been lower. I don't know. What I've been trying to do as of late, and none of these gimmicks are ever long-lived for me, but what I've been trying to do as of late is to try to eat only once per day. And try to keep that eating window into no more than maybe a 3-hour period. Usually it's a 1 or a 2-hour period at most. The theory behind the intermittent fast, which is what that is that you force your body into eating its own fat. And I have plenty for it to eat. Now, I can tell you that at about the 14 to 15 hour mark, it gets tough for me. And I'm pretty sure that there's one guy at the office who sits near the bathrooms who thinks I have a prostate problem because I'm peeing like every couple hours, if not more, because I'm trying to keep my rumbly-tumbly full of liquid rather than delicious happiness-inducing food. The trick, which I've only somewhat mastered, is to limit the calories going in at that one eating window of the day. Most days have been actually pretty good. I've been doing this for a few weeks, not counting this last week, of course. Some days, well, I'm an embarrassment to myself and others, and I can't even look at myself. Those are delicious days, but bad days. Bad, wonderful, delicious, embarrassing days. Incidentally, if you look up the stages of intermittent fasting, from what I've found, they all kind of basically agree with each other, so I feel fairly confident that these stages are correct. So they say that fasting actually begins at about 8 hours after your last meal. So most of us just knock that silliness off right away with some nummy breakfast. From 8 to 12 hours, they say you may feel some excess hunger or fatigue or maybe even trouble concentrating because your glucose levels are beginning to dip. Well, by hour 12, probably sooner, but by hour 12, your body is now dipping into your glycogen or your sugar stores, which stabilizes your glucose levels. This is also where you hit early ketosis, which is where the body starts burning fat as it runs out of carbs for fuel. Once you hit about 16 to 18 hours, you are now in full ketosis. Your liver starts to convert fat into fuel that your muscles, heart, and brain, unless you're a Democrat, needs. Oh, I did that again. But seriously, I believe that statistically, Democrats don't need as much liver fat fuel. Just saying. Anyway, you'll actually start to feel less hungry at this point. Your body is fully in fat-burning mode, so it'll run through fat stores faster, and you may actually start to feel a little bit more mental clarity. Now, if you're just crazy, after 24 hours, you actually drop into autophagy, no idea if I'm saying that right, and anti-aging. This is your body's repair mode where it starts to eat old or damaged cells, which can reduce inflammation. This process also has some other benefits like clearing out damaged proteins in the brain that are linked to Alzheimer's, and it can combat aging. It may even kill some cancerous cells. Now, I'm working on this update on Saturday, and today I went about 25 hours before eating. Now, I was hungry, but not terribly hungry, and I was busy cleaning throughout the day, doing some other things, so I really didn't think about eating that much. Now, when I did eat, I did enjoy eating the food, I'm not going to lie there, and now, about 4 or 5 hours after I ate, my tummy is telling me that I should probably just head on upstairs and get all the food. And my tummy just needs to shut right the heck up. Just because he's bigger than me doesn't mean he can bully me or boss me around. Jerk stomach. Anyway, they go on with, fasting 36 to 48 hours and then the 72 hours or more fast, but I'm not doing those, so I'm going to ignore those stages. If you're curious, You can go ahead and look them up. Anyway, that's where I am. I plan to have a good week this week. See what that results in on Friday. As of right now, working out isn't really in the cards, time being the biggest factor. Hopefully, after things kind of settle down after the July 4th holiday, maybe I can get back to it. Keep saying that. We'll see what happens. Okay, enough time spent on that. Let's move on. Moving into reading, I actually made some decent progress, at least the last couple weeks since the last update. So in just over 30 days since my last goal update, I've added another 346 pages, bringing my total to 2,738 pages for the year, or just about 61% of my goal for the year, with 1 week left to go before the year is 50% of the way done. So that's going well. One book I'm reading is entitled Learning to Love the Psalms. I know that as a Christian, you're supposed to love the Psalms. That's what everybody says. Oh, I just love the Psalms. It's my favorite book. I just can't go with it. Personally, I've just never really been that enamored by them. They've never grabbed my attention. I know it's heresy to say that, but it's true. All right. But what this book does, it gives an introduction to the Psalms as a whole. Then it introduces the 5 books of the Psalms. All the chapters in Psalms are basically arranged into 5 books. Then it has a small conclusion. For each of the 5 books of the Psalms, the author takes a selection of the Psalms, usually, 7 or 8 of them, within that book, and he writes 4 to 5 pages on each of them, explaining what that psalm is, its significance, etc., etc. So I've read the intro to each of the 5 books and the conclusion. And now, as I'm doing my chronological Bible reading, when I get to a psalm that's in this book, I read the chapter in the book prior to reading the psalm. And I have a good idea of what I'm actually reading when I start reading the psalm. So this one is an ongoing process, and it will be for probably most of the rest of the year, at least until I get through all the psalms. But point in saying this is that it's opening my eyes a bit more, and the Psalms they're coming alive more than they ever have before. Psalm 19 so far is my absolute favorite. That's a good one. Anyway, if you have problems reading the Psalms and feeling guilty because you know you're supposed to love the Psalms, I'd really recommend this book. I think it would help. So anyway, talk about that later in the book review if I ever get this book done. So bottom line, goal update wise, reading going well. Okay, and speaking of Bible, out of the 32 days since the last update, I got in my Bible 26 of those days with a goal of, I'm not sure, probably 22 or 23 is what I would be shooting for. Remember, moving my days around kind of screws with the calculations for this update. The point is that I'm putting in a concerted effort to get into the Bible more than my goal of 5 days per week. I'm striving for 6 or 7 days a week. Now, our church pauses Sunday school during the summer, so while that's going on, I don't really have an excuse not to get up and do some reading Sunday morning as well. So getting 7 days a week, 6 for sure, should be pretty easy. So looking at progress versus goal, I'm currently sitting at 113 of my goal pace for days that I've read my Bible. Looking at where I am in relation to getting through my Bible by the end of the next year, shockingly, I'm like right on track. I haven't looked at that in, it's been months since I looked at, that Excel chart thing that I had made up to try and figure out how to get through the Bible and, by the end of next year. I figured I was way behind, but I am like exactly right on pace. So you know what that means, right? I mean, I'm asking because if you do, tell me. I'm not really sure, but hooray for me, I guess. Okay, Duolingo. Oh man, I'm still cranking on learning Greek. Learning it's a funny word. I don't know how much I'm actually learning, but I am progressing. So that's something. I still have my streak. As of right now, I'm sitting at 190 days strong, and I've been able to keep my minutes above the 70 per week goal that I had set. So as of right now, I'm actually sitting at just under 170% of my goal pace for the year. So, I mean, that's something. I don't know. Enough said there. Nothing more to report. Finally, prayers. Now, this is another area I've been trying to focus on more, and since the last update, I've actually moved my progress against my goal from 89.5% to 93.6%. That's a pretty good jump in just a month. Now, that percentage is the highest that I've been at since the end of March, so I'm catching back up to where I need to be. This means that I'm praying more than the 5 days per week goal I had set, obviously, which, praying before bed, which is when I do this, there are going to be some times where it's not going to work. But for the most part, I really have no excuse not to spend some time talking to our Creator and our Father, right? All right. I guess with that, we've reached the end of yet another goal update, this one being number 6, 2024 edition. Now, I say this every time, and I want you to know that I am deadly serious. If you have any questions or comments, ideas, tips or tricks or whatever, let me know. And if you'd like to brag yourself up a bit or express frustration with yourself with your goals, hey, I'm down for that as well. Okay, bye. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.